and progressing it for quite some time. Already in the 90s I had the privilege of being involved in the Dutch Ministry of Transport and leading an information management unit. And what came up then was the concept of teleworking. Oh, that has given me a lot of background, because from that moment on, where we introduced teleworking in the ministry, in an administration, it was clear that it didn't only affect the way we worked, but also the work-life balance and even traffic in the streets. So that lesson, where I worked in an office of 200 people, where I knew all those people, and from the 30 people who were choosing to telework, I knew their home situation. I've seen even many of those places. You see how enormously impactful technology is and how it has been. In those days, the first PCs came in the Netherlands in the household, and the concept of internet widow came up, because yes, often the man was sitting in the office working with his computer, whereas the rest of the family came on and totally fascinated by technology and what it had to offer. In those days, early 90s, to connect and to communicate with each other, we still used bulletin board systems, because the internet didn't offer what it offers today. We've come a long way. But what I've taken on in all the work I've been doing ever since is this deep realization how much technology impacts the way we live in our surroundings, the way we organize our lives. And also this has grown a lot. Today we talk about security and privacy, but that realization is still there, and we need to keep that there as well. So I invite you all, first and for all, to take that as your number one topic. This is about us. This is about people living in a world where we need to live together, and maybe a world that you want to leave to your children. So with that passion, which fits very well with what I know ISOC to be, I think we have an excellent first start. If that's the only thing to take away from the next hour, I'm a happy man. So ever since I've done other things. I worked for the European Commission at the Communication Technology Research Program in the 90s. After that I worked for RAND Corporation, which is a policy research institute, an American one, but with global impact. The biggest institute with a lot of PhDs. And there, what I learned is that multidisciplinarity was so important. And that has given me a lot to take forward. There's no topics today anymore in society that one single discipline can solve. This has changed too. So, that doesn't mean you need to know everything. You need to be aware that there's aspects for which you may need advice. You may need to work with others. And another pleasure of my personal pleasure, I've been able to work with many people more brilliant than I was in different fields and learn a lot from that. After that, I started my own company, and since I'm ever working on this interaction between technology and society. What does technology have to offer to society, and what does society require from technology? And that includes a third area, which is if technology has new things on offer, what is the dark side of it, and how do we prevent that to become bigger than the other one? I've had the pleasure of supporting ISOC actively as board member of the Public Interest Registry for many years, even the honor of chairing it, and in that my passion for ISOC became bigger, and I've been impressed by late night meetings with ISOC executives from Reston, but also local people being around the world, around the table, And if the question was, so why are you here? Impressive stories came up, humbling stories of people, why they committed to help make the internet a better place. Very few, of course, we all need to make a living. That's one aspect. But it seems that many people in this area are not driven by income, but by impact and by making a difference. And of course you need to make it possible. So make sure you don't just spend all your money and under bridges, except when somebody is picking up your ticket to go somewhere. And I left the Public Interest Board, Public Interest Registry Board after having launched .ngo, which is a closed domain for NGOs only, and also starting 4 IDNs. Not because we thought it would be big business quickly, but because we believed it was the right thing to do, and it supported the image of .org as well. And from that time I've learned to know Amitabh Singhal there in the back, a good friend, and actually he was the guy who also helped set up IIIT here, and he was the first CEO of IIIT, right?
Second, actually.
The second, actually. So, also deeply ingrained. So when I got the opportunity to come to India and to work with Satish Babu on setting up this Global Forum for Cyber Expertise workshop that you may have seen advertised, that took place yesterday, that's aimed at capacity building, getting a better understanding of open internet standards, and how they can help already today to increase trust in the internet. It was great that Satish was very instrumental from the beginning, and I've learned to appreciate the silent power of Dr. Govind on the background and the amazing making everything work of Amrita. Yesterday we had a small reception here, and turned out I was the only one who hadn't met her before, so that was impressive. So currently I'm also part of the board of ICANN, and some of you know that ICANN is obviously a central player in the ecosystem as well. I'm not speaking here on behalf of the ICANN board, but of course I will reflect my experience from that position as well, and happy to answer any questions following this presentation. So when I came here yesterday night, Olivier Crepin-Leblanc came to me, who's been a frequent visitor of this school, and he said, "Martin, what are you going to talk about?" I said, "Internet governance." "Why?" "Well," he said, "after you, I have to talk about internet governance." So I said, well, I'm first, so make sure you're in the room and listen. So Olivier, you're taking out slides all the time, right?
Every word you say is one more slide that I'm taking out.
Exactly. He had 98 slides, so you may still end up with a couple.
I'm on 99 now.
Oh.
One more.
So, and well, Olivier, I promise I won't talk about the history, because that's the title of your presentation. But much to my surprise, I found out that Dr. Govind gave an excellent overview about internet governance. So this gives me the time to talk a bit more about how I came to end up here, because he gave a very clear and succinct overview. I can see it was also very compact. So if you're relatively new in the area, there's a lot of impressions. So I would urge you to also download the presentations after this and read and reflect again, because this is not new. It's deep. And that means that people who are in it deeply, like Olaf, like Olivier, like Satish, Dr. Govind, we sometimes don't know what you don't know yet. And then I don't even refer to all the abbreviations that we have, ICANN, ISOC, inSIG. You may know those, but there's many more. So during my presentation, feel free to ask. What I'll try is to give you an impression of the internet governance ecosystem, and maybe how you could play a role in that. And yeah, let's take it away. So there must be a way to get to the next page. Yes. This was the first picture I met when I was starting to look at the internet ecosystem. It's a picture from Internet Society. It's too small to read, but basically you may have seen it already. There is a document on the internet ecosystem that you can find on the the Internet Society website, worthwhile getting a general overview. So on the top you see society, apology naming and addressing. Naming and addressing, that is the unique identifiers that includes the work of the RARs like APSIG, includes the work of ICANN, and of the bodies that work with that, IANA, CCTLDs like .in, and the GTLDs like .com.org. Then we have the next one is local, national, regional, and global policy development. So that's the governments, the UN framework, multilateral institutions like ITU, multilateral, sounds like multi-stakeholder, but basically it's about between countries. So multilateral is between countries. In the past I often saw that some countries, not everybody was aware of the difference between multi-stakeholder and multilateral. I think that's becoming sharper. So people thought they were multi-stakeholder, but frankly it was more multilateral, governance first, and then the rest. I think more and more the insight has emerged that nowadays you can't do it as government alone anymore. Even 20 years or 30 years ago, many countries had monopolists for telecom operations, for railways, for energy. And you see that more and more of these investments nowadays are done by companies that need to make money, because otherwise they're not sustainable either. So that means that these companies own at this moment the largest by far of the infrastructures that we need so much to make society run. So yes, governments continue to have their role, particularly because they have the monopoly of enforcement of laws that are there to protect society in principle. But companies are the biggest owners of infrastructures that serve the world. Now, the next one is education and capacity building. Education and capacity building is what would help the internet, if it's an open end-to-end system, to have people benefit from it and to use it, to be critical about the information they get. We saw Dr. Govan mention fake news. So important, so key that we use the internet to inform ourselves, but also to be aware of the sources that there are. If one single source says something, it may not be true, and yes, the brand of where the information comes from matters. But the internet is not all true. There is fake news on there, and there's a lot of useful news on there. And you can help make sure that people find their way in that. So the next one is users themselves, the foundation. ISOC is championing the users, that's their prime mission. And also in ICANN, I can say users have an important role. We have the at-large organization, which is one of the advisory councils in ICANN. I think you are. Are you a member of the council? Or?
I'm chair of the APSIG.
Okay, chair of one of the local or the regional parts that form together the ALEC. So in that way also directly involved in what's happening at ICANN, where we do follow a multi-stakeholder approach, and which is bottom-up policy development. So the next one is shared global services. The nice thing about the internet is that it works and that there's a lot of people putting in their heart, their efforts, their best thing, but we also need good business to make it all possible. To have the connections, to have the registries, to have the clouds nowadays, to have the search engines, all kind of services that will help the internet to be useful. And last but not least, there is the open standard development. I could have started there as well, because the internet is basically started as an open standard development. The beauty of it is that it's open standards that are shared, so you can see how they function. You can use them to build, and this has led basically to where we are today. When the first open standards were built, it was really, literally, a technologist in a room of a hotel, as Olaf also told yesterday. And when the internet was emerging and the DNS was emerging, so pre-ICANN was basically a notebook like this, and a professor who wasn't commercially thinking, handing out TLDs to people who made sense to him. Also there we've come a long way. So this picture of the internet ecosystem is a useful view and can help you to understand how this all works. But there's different takes, there's different ways to look at what needs to happen in terms of internet governance. For instance, you can look at the layer approach. So you can see there's this technical layer where we build it all on, which is building on an infrastructure layer, which is pure connectivity and regulations about connectivity like net neutrality, etc. The technical layer is the names and the numbers, but also the protocols and other standards. These are mostly determined by technical people. Who of you have been to ITF before? So, and who of you are regulars at ITF? Okay, I had to lower my hand here too. I've been there because I've been impressed by what it has to bring, and I wanted to know what the processes are. But yes, these are technical processes. They're bottom up in a way that it's welcome to anybody who comes there. They're less inclusive, that if you don't have anything to contribute, really, be careful in taking the time of the others. Do that in the corridors, not during the meetings. You will find a warm home, but if you take too much time during working groups, sessions, it's not the most pleasant environment. Although that's changing, right, Olaf?
Yeah.
Yeah. Try it. They won't kill you. Then the content layer, obviously very important, because in the end it's about content. It's about the information we exchange, the information we approach, and there's a lot of aspects there, ranging from property rights to cybercrime, to things that to fake news nowadays, spam, etc. And on top of that is a societal layer, and that's how all this impacts society, how we deal with it. In the 90s, also when we did the telework, we had the netiquette. And netiquette was an etiquette for using the internet. Well, in that time, if you abused the internet, you would be flamed, as they say. So basically, people would really make it clear to you that this was not appropriate behavior, and I'm now using English, not Dutch. That has disappeared. So one of the challenges today is, so how do we deal with norms? How do we deal with a proper way of interaction on the internet? We need to talk about it. And it doesn't mean that there's one truth. It doesn't mean there's one way that is perfect. But I think the openness, the bottom up, and the respect for different cultures, and of course, even for legislations is there. On the internet, it's not for us to judge how a country rules its country. We just are to offer the internet. And in that we need to be aware of how our systems can be used for and by people. So when we come to ICANN, you see that in a way the same system that was depicted by ISO comes back, but in a slightly different way. And this, I want to give you two different pictures also to make you understand that internet governance isn't one fixed view. It's a matter of how you prioritize things, and these are different in different corners. It depends also on your purpose, on your contribution. So in the ICANN perspective, you will find naming, addressing, and standards at the foundation of the model, where governance on one hand and operations. So that was the shared global services and these kind of things on the other hand are making things possible, but also very central, because if you want to let an infrastructure work, is the security layer. So how do we ensure that what we do on the internet you can rely on and trust on? We have a responsibility there from ICANN, which is mostly reflected in the work of RSEC and SSEC. And there's many more who work on that. Certs are very important, and police forces, etc. So this is merely to show the functional difference. Here you see there's this little upper corner that says governance, and the names in there are governments and companies, is the UN related to IGF, WSIS processes, ISOC and ITU. Same elements, different emphasis, but very much aware of the global context. Yet, if we go one step further, we see the model that Joseph Nee put on the table when thinking about the future of the internet in a strategic session. And there you see in the center some of the bodies we know so well, ICANN, IANA, ISOC, the RARs, but around it all the other bodies that are there to make things work in the UN, in incident response, corporate decisions, industry standards, conferences. Out there is that circle which is depicting in a way the world. There's more out there. All we do is in the context of a world where human rights have a certain importance, where government groupings, G7, G8, G20, OECD prepare decisions, where there's international law conventions related to trade, related to security, related to all kind of things that are supported by countries, by enforcement. Intelligence community alliances, law enforcement alliances. A big power and more difficult to define is the intellectual property regimes. Intellectual property rights may seem to use something that is like, oh, these guys just want to make money. But basically, making money is essential to get innovation and to get businesses developed. So how do we come to the right balance of securing that people who invest in something get a proper return, but also that society can benefit from this? This is not only a challenge in internet, but for instance also in pharmaceuticals, etc., as you may be aware. Yeah, and the telecom regimes, etc. So, what we see is those bodies who've been at the basis of developing the internet, make possible what is actually happening today, are increasingly confronted with a world that is affecting them more and more, is affecting the way they can operate more and more. We talked about the privacy legislation as a clear example there, but there's other things too. And it's not only that these bodies are affected by the world is also more and more affected by these bodies, which increases the interaction. Because of this, we cannot ignore policy anymore. We cannot ignore legislation anymore. We can't just make things work. We need to go beyond that. Because also the impact of what we do with the internet is so hugely profound on society that we need to take that responsibility there and need to take that into account. I remember, I think more than a year ago when I came to India and had a conversation about privacy, at the highest level, ministers would say, first thing to do is poverty. That goes before everything else, poverty 1, 2 and 3. But when talking about the profound impact of the increasing digitization of society, IoT plays a role there as well, big data plays a role, the ability to, in a way, as I said before, making a movie of somebody's life just from taking data from the internet, if you could freely collect that. That makes it so much more important that we are aware of privacy elements. Maybe not against use of data that are related to persons, because it helps us to fight diseases, it helps us to prevent disasters, to warn people, and all these things. But very much, it's important that it's not abused against us. So at least abuse against us should continue to be forbidden, even if we cannot avoid that more data of us is out there. So that requires a lot of action. That requires not only more security, so you know where data goes, who has access to data, but also clarity about what can be done by data, how to share it, who is the owner of the data, should the user be informed, be aware of the usage of the data, and the whole GDPR discussion that has instigated the discussion all over the world, in India, but also in China. You may know there's also a legislation which at least takes GDPR at its basis as well. We're getting there, but it's a discussion that we need to continue to do. And one of the things that I learned there personally for me is that those who are privacy protectors can be very passionate, but sometimes focus too much on no, you should not touch the data. I think we're beyond that point. We need to realize that data may or will or could be compromised. Yesterday in the newspaper, Facebook, against 30 million people compromised.
Yes.
Something like that.
Yes, there was an
at the same time, also in Holland, one of the health insurance companies, it's not 30 million because we only have 17 million people in Holland, but more than 1 million people compromised the data as well. Or was it?
22 million.
I didn't know this.
Oh.
Which health company? Was it mine?
I didn't check that because I didn't hack your data, so I don't know which is yours. But I could have, maybe. So you just see how this changes profoundly. So one of the things we've been doing, ISOC, ICANN, other players in the field, even in my role at PIR, is that we became aware of this necessity and we started to informing governments as well, to prevent governments from taking decisions that have what we call unintended consequences. And I think the biggest, the first time that it was really visible was at Wicked. When was Wicked, Olaf? You remember? 2014 or?
Yeah, 2014 or
2012.
12.
Gosh,
Thank you.
long time ago already.
2012 in Dubai.
Thank you. So that was the first time where, and what we did, and what we managed to do, was get people on delegations, which were only governments, but who were knowledgeable. So Olaf joined the Dutch delegation. We had the CEO of RIPE to join the German delegation. We had the chairman of APSIG, Patrick Wallström, to join the Swedish delegation, which helped to inform the policymakers in the room about what the consequences of certain decisions would be. And I think that was a place where ISOC Global has played also a very useful role in education and information to governments on these kind of factors. This goes on and on. Nowadays there's also talks at UN level more and more about what to do with internet. Already for some years there's an attempt to arrange cybersecurity. Well, how this is done will affect the way we can operate and use the internet. So we need to make sure it's informed. More recently, you may be aware of that, there's even by the Secretariat General of the UN earlier this summer, a high-level panel on digital collaboration launched. In that way, truly global, that the chair people were Melinda Gates, so from Bill. Now, if she goes there, Bill is +1. And Jack Ma from China, from Alibaba. Well, he used to be Alibaba, but he will always be its founder. And what was expressed there was, it's really that the realization that digital technologies, the way they come up and spread and impact is unprecedented. And that we don't know how to deal with this across borders, because legislation is still based on jurisdictions on countries' autonomies. So that means that when it goes across borders, we need to agree on how to do that. And the current measures we have in place, for instance, for police collaboration, there is ways that police forces can ask assistance across borders, but these are processes that cost months. And in the internet environment, that means a lot of crime can be done in the meanwhile. So how do you follow up to that? The second element of internet environment is that many crimes nowadays are at least involving 2 or 3 or more jurisdictions. So also there we need to think of ways forward. Also the realization that these digital technologies, like IoT, like big data, sharing information, are the only way that we will be able to reach the so-called Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable Development Goals were set up by the UN in line with the human rights. So how do we make sure that humans have a decent life in this world? So enough food, emancipation, so equal rights also for men and women, clean water, safety. You can find them back. I don't know them all by heart, but there's 18 of them. And we will not be able to reach any of those without the good use of good technologies. So this also means that a way of dealing with the dangers of technologies is not just ban them or limit them beyond what's necessary, because we need to use them. So to find that balance, to be aware of what good it has to bring at the same time of its dangers, is something to be very deeply ingrained in your thinking as well. The mission of this, you'll be happy to know, is to ensure a safe and inclusive digital future for all, taking into account relevant human rights norms. The norms part, I'm not sure you're going to talk about that later as well, Olaf, did you see?
I'm not sure either.
So, the norms, to make norms explicit is an important part. IGF is also having a role on that. We call it good practice. So if we agree on what is good practice in certain areas, that is some kind of norm above legislation is not taking the place of legislation either, but it's informing legislation as well. So if you all agree on what are good norms across across stakeholder groups and across cultures, then we get to things. One of those things is that ethics should be taken into account. So where we are today, I'm already been sketching a lot of changes that have happened over the years that have impacted the way internet governance operates, interacts, and who's playing which active role in that. I think if you look ahead for another couple of years to 2025, the world will be changed even more. And realization is very much that internet users will be even more to be found in Asia rather than in where the internet started, in the US, and expanded first, US and Europe. It also comes with a shift in economic power and purchase power. So also emphasis of where the business will be done. And that's towards Asia. But another move is, if you look differently at the world, you look at the very rich, the less rich, the less rich, the poor, the very poor. That the internet allows a growth of a middle class by people who are educated, who are clearly getting the opportunities, but the opportunities come closer because of the internet to wherever you are. You don't need to be in a Western country anymore or in the capital anymore to have access to information, education, etc. It's still not given to everybody. I mean, I can't change that, but you will see that overall growth of middle class will happen everywhere. And a clear challenge is now with all the economic interest coming up, there's more bad guys interested in the internet. There's also more effect to be obtained by pressure groups or governments in taking down electricity grids, other kind of attacks. We've been aware of an attack on Ukraine who affected, for instance, Maersk, one of the biggest shipping companies, very much, which led to many containers not being shipped or being lost or being stuck in harbors for a long time as a kind of collateral damage. But also cybercrime, and we become more dependent on it as well. So whereas in the past, if your PC didn't work for a day, well, it wasn't a problem. Now it can be. But more and more of your environment, your physical environment, is the same thing. Also dependent on the internet. And it really requires thinking. For instance, take it, if your car is very much integrated with the internet, but you don't have internet access, you still want to be able to open your doors, close your doors, and use it. And that goes for the house as well. The house can become increasingly IoT enabled, and doesn't mean that you want the house not to function. What if your windows are the ones that you steer via the internet? Maybe you use your mobile or your home device to close the windows or to make them dark instead of putting curtains in front of it. And it's broken. It'd be good to have those curtains still so you can still close them. It's this kind of thinking that we need to think ahead, but also to bring in the systems that have been launched for many years on a first to market basis. Applications, we all know the blue screen from Microsoft Windows. Well, some of us use Macs for many years already. But we cannot have that anymore. we need to secure our systems. It becomes more of a responsibility that we need to put to providers of those tools to make sure that we can rely on them, to make sure it's clear how much we can depend on them. And we are working on that. For instance, in IoT, just to give the impression of one of the challenges of it, IoT devices have been on the internet for a long time, but we haven't been that dependent on them, and we will become even more dependent on them towards the future. When it was just the coffee pot in the Trojan room in the university, where you could see so it's empty or not, so it doesn't make sense to walk there to get coffee in the 60s. Nowadays, many traffic systems in the Netherlands are depending on it. So we really have a hard time when it breaks away. Basically, I think the systems fall back on a kind of automatic routine rather than just shut down. But that is clear. Another thing we don't know yet is the issues we don't know to expect yet. I think this morning one of the things that was mentioned was sextortion. That wasn't an issue 5 years ago. Never heard of it then. And now what you see is that these things are happening. It was last week in the Netherlands, a news article that people received emails where they was said, we've seen you visited the pornographic site, and we filmed you using the camera while you were enjoying the movie. And unless you give us so much money, in bitcoins of course, we will send it to all the addresses in your address book. And that would come from your own email address. It would seemingly come from your own email address. Oh, I can assure you some people paid and were hush-hush about it. Others, of course, didn't bother because they knew such a movie couldn't exist. But the fact that this can happen is because of inbuilt flaws in our system. The good news is that also here open standards can already help today. In the article it said that there's 3 email standards, DKIM, DMARC, SPF, that can help prevent to be spoofed like this, so to be confused like this. So let's use those open technologies. So I think that's the last thing that comes, whatever we do in terms of governance, whatever we do in terms of improving systems, it's also important people are aware of it and start using it. If you're still having one password for every access you do, at some point you will be in trouble. At some point your money will be gone. At some point your information will be spread. Maybe not today, maybe not next year, but you're subject to whatever people want. And you may think, well, I've got so little, why would anybody want it? Well, maybe there's somebody in your environment who begins to dislike you for whatever reason. And maybe there's commercial services, people offering, well, if you want to compromise one of your friends, I'll do that for $50 or $100 or whatever. So the mind shift is also in ourselves. So with that, and not, I'm really curious to your thoughts and your ideas on what do you think that by 2025 in this changed world, in this world that you already have seen changing so much over the last years, what will be needed? What will be there? So if I can ask for a couple of microphones, I would really love people to come with suggestions. What do you think is really important to change, to pick up, to serve the public interest in 2025?
Yeah,
It was faster. You'll be second.
I have a question. I'm there.
Oh, hi.
Yeah,
Sorry.
hi. I have a question about what you've been doing over the past.
Identify the name.
Yeah, I'm Kshitij Saxena. I have a question about, I've read a lot about what you have been doing over the past couple of years. I mean, a lot of years as a matter of fact.
Who is you?
You,
Me personally?
yes.
Oh,
And I've been reading your articles, and you've spoken about almost everything, and recently you spoke about 5G, big data as well. I was wondering what's your take on quality of internet service? The reason why I'm asking this question is I recently read an article. This data is coming from World Economic Forum of 2017, which says more than 4 billion people, almost 55% of world's population, they don't use internet. So, I mean, in such a scenario, where do you think is the importance of talking about quality of internet service? I mean, we've talked about security, everything else, but are we really talking about quality of internet service? Is it because internet is becoming pervasive, that's why we're not talking about it? Or should we talk about it? I mean, what's your stand?
it's a useful, thank you for the question and thank you for your interest. I hope you haven't been sleeping too much halfway my articles. I think there's two things. One, what we see is that the uptake, the more recent uptake has been, so on addition of the hours, I have 1 hour and 10 minutes?
No.
Or, okay.
10 minutes today. That's it.
Good. The big growth has been in mobile, which is great because it allowed many more people to get access, and I know how mobile, for instance, has offered new opportunities for a lot of entrepreneurs in India already, and in Africa and in other countries, where access was the biggest problem. So it's a quick way towards first access. But obviously from a little screen or from a computer, what you can do with it is already more difficult. And what is very clear and very well understood, you can also see that in OECD reports, is that broadband matters. Broadband really drives economic innovation and progress. So the first step is to get online, but you're not done then. Then the second step is to get better access. So that is one aspect of it. But the second aspect is what is really helping. I was recently in Estonia. Estonia is a very small country. It's bordering Russia. And they're very happy to be part of the European Union and NATO right now, unlike the Ukraine, for instance. But they've also, after having left the Iron Curtain behind, etc., a lot of investments in setting up society in an electronic way. So government services are very much set up in electronic ways. There have been failures, there have been improvements, and you see how much they move forward, how much entrepreneurship is driving it, and how economy is steadily growing, and how they become a front runner in the use of electronic services. That is commitment that starts at the top and that is adopted by people, and people are involved there as well. So the bottom-up aspect is important too. So inspiration from governments, crucial. We had a talk with Ajay, where are you? Dr. Data. He may have even read more of me. But basically in IDNs as well. So how do you take up IDNs? Well, it starts with having content. And if a government is able to provide all that content in all these different scripts, that would be an instigator for take-up already. So the quality of services where government can lead the way by becoming a more electronic provider of services is another step. And I agree with you that all these opportunities will need to be filled in. And you can do it locally, but it requires capacity building. So it's the infrastructure, it's leading by example, having content, and it is the services themselves. I very much agree. The good news is we're now at a stage where we can make a difference in that. So much to be done. So I got you, and that gentleman in blue over there as well, right? And then you, but he was first?
So he's second and third, fourth, I think.
He has the microphone.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, I'm Krishna. I'm a technology and a policy professional. Last year, what happened was Amazon's cloud went down because they relied on one single DNS server provider. Do you see monopolization of technologies pertaining to the internet as a threat to the public's use and the right to choice of the use of these technologies for the public.
Yes, I'll speed up a bit so we make sure at least you get. But basically, what we see and saw is also with the DIN attack, which you may remember was before that. Network was taken down as a very important and high quality internet provider because of its architecture. I think awareness of this is going up rapidly, and what we also see that on the lower layers of the internet, there's a kind of companies that grow and dominate and do others, and they do combine. So they learn from it, and they learn from each other, and there's an active approach towards improving that. I got 5 minutes, Olaf.
But I'm gonna give a small teaser and a heads up.
Okay.
On this topic, consolidation in the internet infrastructure, we are doing some thinking at the Internet Society, at the head office, in the terms of our global internet report. And actually, these questions are really, really hard. Because if you look at this on the data provision layer, services layer, and the application layers, the questions that you can ask on the impact of what does this mean for the internet actually? The questions there, like what does this mean for the invariance of the internet? Sorry for that, Martin.
I just get 10 minutes more. So
you get 10 minutes more.
This goes off your time because you're speaking.
Right. But I'm just giving a heads up. We're breaking our heads over this, and this year's Global Internet Report will not feature recommendations, but questions, because these are very difficult questions that we're facing now. And at this moment, I don't think anybody has clear answers to those questions of what does consolidation mean for the internet, for internet users. Will they be more secure? Will there be more or less choice? Will they be captured? What are the economics? And so on and so forth. Loads of questions.
And the last 2 hours today will be about that. First Olaf talking and then a panel.
Nope, that will be about cybersecurity.
Okay. Just one addition is that ICANN, we're also aware that even the internet and the DNS, which has been functioning pretty well for so many years now, we're aware that we need to continue to beef it up and up our game. So I got you, and then you, and then we'll close it with gratitude for the extra minutes that we received.
Great, thanks. I'm Harsh from Mumbai. So basically, a bit of context. Google is booting the idea of and actually going through with introducing a censored search engine in China, which will also, create space for surveillance and profiling and all of that, right? And when I looked at this, I remembered Eric Schmidt's statement about the bifurcation of the internet into two, a US-led version and the China-led version. So, how do we stop, stop the internet from going on a path where it's dominated by, two different countries, and, when we might see a day where China has a seat at the table calling the shots for a lot of things, like they are now with the search engine.
Yes, very short, because this is also about how internet governance will continue to change. What we saw was that the domination of the internet originally came from the US, then US, Europe, and now is spread out more. If we take this to 2025, there will be so much market power, economic power, maybe even real power in Asia that by tradition has much more top-down regimes. So that is likely to affect the way the internet is operated. Now, all those that are at the core of building the internet, going back to the ones in this block, the stance at this moment is very much a commitment to the bottom-up multi-stakeholder approach. And for ICANN, it means also to continue to deliver a trusted, open internet. But in that, we very much realize that how China sets its rules within its country is up to China. What we are still aiming to offer is an open end-to-end internet and to facilitate that role.
I can take
So
it
I have
offline.
one question related to net neutrality. I want to ask how will the ISPs coordinate to build a net neutrality, because this topic was going on since last year. Many things, it came like a debate and everything happened. But if I see, I go to an international country, there we have problems like roaming. So how will this net neutrality will be solved?
Are you going to tackle that, Olaf?
No, I won't talk about that one.
Oh, thank you.
No.
Well, very shortly, there's quite a debate on this as well, and I can't give a definite answer. I think net neutrality in itself, my personal opinion is it's a good thing. It makes sure that the transport layers do give access to whatever services are there. At the same time, I realize that sometimes there's emergency services and there's different levels. And I think also in 5G you will see this reflected by having different functions, different functionality, different service levels in that way. For the low rate, once in a while data sending towards all the way towards the high quality video connections that are reliable. So how this exactly is going to work out, I don't know. I think it's important that services can be provided across the networks, and that needs to be ensured. And I know the discussion is high. Even within the United States, you saw that the federal government took one decision, and the Californian took another one. So it's clear that the jury is out there. Personally, I think net neutrality is an excellent principle to be supported. I think it's also key in ISOC's thinking, right, Olaf?
Yes.
Net neutrality is a good thing, right?
Yes.
Okay. Then last question.
But you have to be very careful with saying net neutrality, because it means so many different things for different people.
Criticality of services. Okay. So we got two more people, or one more person? Okay.
You want to start and then they will come.
Thank you very much for
Answer.
I'm happy to respond to any questions because we'll stay here until the end of the afternoon.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Martin. I'm going to spare you a question and actually try to suggest something to the last slide that you presented. I actually like that you ended at a tease and we all have something to think about. I really have 2 points to say about this, both equally challenging. The first one is the user itself. We are all users, whether or not we are associated